We shared some ideas and comments, which I'll take back to Washington as early as this evening in terms of calls, and reflected, and perhaps there's something to build on there. But it was a frank conversation. It was an important one. We had it. Look, the president's been pretty clear. He's disappointed and frustrated that there's not been more flexibility on the Russian side to bring about an end to this conflict.
What was your message to the Russian foreign minister today, and what is the Trump administration's strategy now to end the Ukraine war?
Well, our strategy is to continue to engage all the parties that are involved in finding an outcome to this conflict. We will engage any time that we have an opportunity to do so, like we did today. I echoed what the president has said, both disappointment and frustration at the lack of progress in peace talks or in a path forward. So we'll continue to engage. We shared some ideas and comments, which I'll take back to Washington as early as this evening in terms of calls, and reflected, and perhaps there's something to build on there. But it was a frank conversation. It was an important one. We had it, and we talked about some other items as well and related to the war in Ukraine, but that was obviously the first and foremost topic that we discussed. And look, the president's been pretty clear. He's disappointed and frustrated that there's not been more flexibility on the Russian side to bring about an end to this conflict. We hope that can change. And we're going to continue to stay involved where we see opportunities to make a difference.
Without speaking for the foreign minister, which I know you don't want to do.
Which foreign minister?
This
one. Oh,
Mr. Lavrov.
Yes.
Yeah, without speaking for him, did you get the sense that they're moving towards flexibility?
Yeah, I'm not going to characterize our conversation other than to tell you that I expressed what the president has said publicly, which is that we feel as if we've dedicated a lot of time and energy to this matter, and just not enough progress has been made. We need to see a roadmap moving forward about how this conflict can conclude. And then we shared some ideas about what that might look like, and obviously I'll take that back to the president here as early as this evening, and hopefully there's something that we can build on there, but we'll find out.
A couple of months ago you said that what was necessary to end this war would be a conversation between President Trump and President Putin, but there have now been multiple phone calls between the two of them, and yet the war in Ukraine goes on. Does this speak to any weakness in terms of the president's ability to negotiate an end to this conflict, or why does it persist despite them having spoken?
Well, this is a war that the president inherited, right? He got elected and it had already been going on, and no progress had been made to that point towards peace of any kind. In fact, there had not even been any meetings between the Ukrainians and the Russians for quite some time. So while there's been some humanitarian exchanges made, obviously that's our goal here, is to end this war and any role we can play. So this is not a war that started under President Trump. It's a war that wouldn't have happened had he been president, but now it's here. And we'll continue to engage and do everything we can and hopefully make progress. As I said, and I've said repeatedly, look, if we see an opportunity to make a difference in this, we're going to take it and we're going to pursue it. And that's what the president has done. And he deserves tremendous credit for having multiple phone calls with leaders from both countries and anybody else.
Mr. Secretary, Russia has launched its most massive attacks in the last 3 days, and you of course saw your counterpart today. Are you willing now to put stronger sanctions on Russia?
Well, the president has said that that's an option that's available to him, both under existing authorities, but primarily if the Senate and the House can pass legislation that gives them the opportunity to do that. So we've been engaging with Congress on what that bill would look like. Obviously, the president needs flexibility on how those sanctions would be applied and when, because it gives them, maximum leverage in any conversation and negotiation. So he has talked about that as being a real option, and now obviously we've been engaging with the Senate in particular over the last week on what that bill will look like, and the leaders of both chambers have said that they're prepared to begin to move forward on that. We've expressed this to the Russians weeks ago. We told them that the moment would come where something like this could happen, and we'll continue to express it because that's the reality.
But has the moment come, or not yet?
Well, again, that's the president's decision to make. He's frustrated by the fact that more progress has not been made.
Mr. Secretary, there were reports earlier this week that you and the president were unaware that the Pentagon had made a decision to at least temporarily halt the arms shipments to Ukraine. What's your take on that decision by the Pentagon, and what is your general take?
Well, I think that decision's been, yeah, that decision unfortunately was mischaracterized. It was a pause pending review on a handful of specific type munitions. That, frankly, is something that is logical that you would do, especially after an extended engagement that we saw both in defense of Israel and in defense of our own bases. And so it was a very limited review of certain types of munitions to ensure that we had sufficient stockpiles. And it's typical when you do these reviews that there's a short-term pause, because if, in fact, the review comes back that you have a shortage, you can't pull it back once it's been sent. But generally speaking, aid to Ukraine continues along the schedule that Congress appropriated.
Which types were paused? Which types of weapons were paused?
Largely defensive in nature. Some were offensive. But again, the ones that were expended in recent conflicts in the Middle East, and again, not because there is a shortage, but because it's prudent to look at it and say, okay, do we have enough of these in our stockpiles for all of our obligations around the world, both in defense of our bases in the Middle East, but also our obligations to our Indo-Pacific partners and any other contingencies that might arise. But in the end, I would say that the overwhelming majority of defense of military aid that the United States provides Ukraine has never been paused and continues along the same schedules that it's been. I think there's a broader issue unrelated to the pause, and that involves the defense productive capabilities of the West, not just us, but of Europe. As an example, one of the things that the Ukrainians need is more Patriot batteries. There are Patriot batteries available in multiple countries in Europe, yet no one wants to part with them. So I hope that'll change. If in fact that Ukraine is the priority that so many countries in Europe say it is, they should be willing to share batteries that right now they don't have a need to use. So hopefully we'll be able to convince some of our NATO partners to provide those Patriot batteries to Ukraine, because there are a number of countries that have them, but no one wants to part with what they have. So perhaps that'll change. That's important.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned wanting to see a roadmap for how this conflict can conclude. What concrete ideas have you presented, and how did Russia respond in this meeting?
Well, again, these things are best negotiated. I don't want to in private, and that's how these things generally work. There were some ideas exchanged today, some viewpoints that they expressed to us that I'll take back to the president for his consideration, and hopefully it will lead to something. I don't want to overpromise. I mean, again, as I said, this is a conflict that's been going on now for over 3 years, and as has already been pointed out by one of the questions here, we've seen an acceleration of attacks. I think it's probably the largest drone attack in a city close to the Polish border, actually, so it's a pretty deep strike. And again, I mean, every time you see this in the headlines and people die, it reminds you of why the president wants this war to end. As he has said from the beginning, his #1 interest here is to stop people from dying and the destruction that's ongoing every single day. They're going to be having a conference, maybe it starts today if I'm not mistaken, about reconstruction and the rebuilding of Ukraine. Every time one of these strikes is launched, the price of reconstruction goes up, right? There's also the destruction of the country's capabilities, the country's economic capabilities that has to be added to this. But obviously the loss of life is something of great interest to the president. It's important to note that since January of this year, as an example, just to give you on the Russian side, they've lost 100,000 soldiers, dead. Not injured, I'm talking about dead. And on the Ukrainian side, the numbers are less, but still very significant. And so the president doesn't like wars. He thinks wars are a waste of money and a waste of lives, and he wants them to end. And he's going to do everything he can within his power to end this war and any other war he has a chance to end, as you've seen in the past. And so we're going to continue to work at it. We understand that these things take time and patience, but obviously we're also frustrated that more progress has not been made. And hopefully based on today and in the days to come, we'll have more clarity about what exactly the Russian position and priorities are in this regard, and can begin to make some progress. But it's, it's been difficult, as you've seen.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
China's
on
been
question.
supporting Russia. Will you meet with your Chinese counterpart here this week to speak to him about
Yeah, I think
that?
we're working on that. Maybe we'll meet, and obviously we'll talk about it. I think the Chinese clearly have been supportive of the Russian effort, and I think that generally they've been willing to help them as much as they can without getting caught. But people in Europe and other parts of the world have noticed. But in the end, this peace, if it's possible and doable, will happen between Ukraine and Russia, and we are willing to do whatever we can to help bring it to an end.
Can I ask an ASEAN question?
A what?
An ASEAN
Yeah,
question.
of course. That's why we're here, right?
Can I ask you one more quick question on Russia? Just these ideas that were put on the table today, would you characterize them as new ideas from the Russian side that the Trump administration had not heard before?
Yes, well, I think maybe, yes, I think it's a new and a different approach. Again, I wouldn't characterize it as something that guarantees a peace, but it's a concept that we'll take back to the president today and hear as soon as I finish with you.